time to recovery.
Yeah.
For like software apps.
I think this is like 4 minutes at most.
MTTR, we're back up in 4 minutes. What's your MTTR? Ours is 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
And our webinars go down, we're back up in 4 minutes. That's finding a room. That's securing a time.
Securing a time.
That's finding a room. That's securing a time. Okay, that sounds pretty good.
We got it.
All right, we're good. Let me load this back up. All right.
And we are back.
Sweet. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see if it shows that. Sweet. We're back. All right. Perfect. And we'll just try to jump back in once this goes away. I think that'll disappear at some point. You can't see it.
I can't see it.
Okay,
Only
sweet.
see it.
All right. So AWS Lambda. This is a component. I think we're at
Only 5 lines of code. Only
right,
takes 5 lines of code. Talk about the handler.
So on line 4, we have the handler. And so index.handler. And then on line 5, we have this code path. If you notice a different background, just give 1 second. Okay, I'll try again. So on line 4, we have the handler. This allows AWS Lambda to understand where the starting point is for your Lambda function. On line 5, we have the code path. So that will be the actual local directory where your code is stored. And then moving to the next slide, we have our GraphQL schema. So the GraphQL schema defines all the data types, the functions, resolvers, all these type of things. So you can see over here, we have a type of post that has a few different fields here, like ID, author, title, which are strings. You can see this exclamation mark. That means that it's required. So if you try to create a new post or get a post, you have to provide the author and the ID, and that'll give you back the post. Then you have get post here that takes ID. And then we have the schema up here at the top, which defines what query actually means. Here is the AppSync component. So as you can see here, serverless AWS AppSync. It takes a couple of inputs. The first one is name posts, and then it has an authentication type. So this could be API key or AWS IAM, or I think it even supports Cognito user pool as well. And then you have API keys here on line 13. So you're kind of defining what that is. And with that, that's all the code that you need. So 7 lines of code, and we're able to create the AppSync API. Then we have the data sources. So the data sources will be the AWS Lambda or the DynamoDB database or RDS. All of those are considered data sources. And you can then attach them to your AppSync by using line 17 through 21. So first you specify the type. So that would be AWS Lambda. And you have the name here of get post. And then the config basically points to a Lambda function. So this is saying that this data source uses AWS Lambda and then points to this specific Lambda function. In the next screen, we can see mapping templates. So when we talk about VTL files, that will be the mapping template. And so you can see here that we have a data source of get post. And so looking back at the last screen, you can see data source, and then the name on line 19 is get post. So if you use that name, it's going to link back to that Lambda function. So now you're saying if somebody makes a query of get post to our API hosted on AppSync, it's going to run to the data source, get post, and that data source is an AWS Lambda function. So that's the full like end-to-end connection that's happening. This would be an example of what an API request would look like. And as you can see on every single one of these slides, the source is the serverless framework. One of the people at the serverless framework wrote about this yesterday morning, and I wanted to show people about it immediately. And so I basically, I used some of the article snippets to then construct these slides. If you want to see the actual press release from them and you want to actually read more about it in detail, definitely check out the source here. I'll share the slides out on LinkedIn. And if you need them, please just request it and we can give it to you. So in this, on line 1, we're importing a library for node fetch. This allows us to make an API request. On line 4, we have the AppSync URL. So you can see .appsync-API. and at the very end /GraphQL. So this API URL is what we actually use to connect to our schema. And the schema then validates our request. And then if it passes, it then passes it to the correct data source. So the database or Lambda. Line 8, we have the API key. And then down here on line 13 through 22, we can see that we're making a post request on line 14. And then we're passing a header of API key. And then we have a body here of query, get post. Again, this would be the resolver here. And it passes an ID in, and then it requests some data back from GraphQL. So this is a very standard, on line 20, a very standard GraphQL query. And this is a very basic example of how to do this. If you wanted to there's a lot of more efficient ways of writing these GraphQL queries. I mean, if you look at line 20, that's somewhat gibberish, and it's just this hard-coded string. And so if you imagine that your application was hundreds of APIs, you would need hundreds of these hard-coded strings that are hard to update. And if you miss one letter, for instance, if you missed an E or you didn't have an L, your whole API is going to break. And so this is not the best way to do it. However, for a simple example, this is 24 lines of code, and this is how it would be used inside of your application. So CRUD APIs without code. So this was the meat of this presentation. I wanted to give a very good background about how all this stuff works, and then get into the part that I'm most excited about, which is creating these APIs without any Lambda function at all. To do that, we use something called velocity templating language. I called it the magic here in parentheses, because when you leverage these, you can remove a ton of API code, or you can remove the API code completely. So in my opinion, all CRUD functionality, so create, read, update, delete, very normal stuff. Every application uses it. When you go into your settings and you change your profile name, that would be a update, right? When you delete a tweet, that would be the delete functionality. When you open Twitter for the first time, that would be a get all tweets functionality. Those ones are very simple. And if you think about what is all the things that make up Twitter, most of the stuff is CRUD APIs. Most things are CRUD APIs. There's a lot of stuff happening in the background, but for a lot of simple cases, these create, read, update, delete, they cover a wide range of what you actually need for a proof of concept or even for a full-scale application. AWS has their own Vtl specific packages. So just like in the other screenshot on line 1, where we're importing that node fetch library and then using it, you can actually do that with Vtl files. For instance, if you wanted to get the exact timestamp, you could use a Vtl library or a Vtl package that AWS created. Or if you want to do things like stringifying an object or more complex stuff, AWS has a library for that. Vtl files, they're not just JSON files. As we talked about earlier, you can do for loops. You can set variables, and you can also stringify objects, get date times, all that stuff, all in a static file. So to update what our AppSync architecture diagram looks like, this would be what we had earlier, except I've used a big white box over the other two data sources. And you can see here, there's no Lambda function required. So we're able to go from AppSync directly to DynamoDB and run this full CRUD functionality without anything else. No JavaScript, no Python, no Go, no Java, nothing. And how we do that is through that Vtl mapping template. So let's look at what that looks like. So the C in CRUD, right? So the create part. So we're going to create something in the database. This is what it'll look like. So this create request, this would be your .vtl file. As you can see here on line 3, we have this operation which says put item. So put item is create something, right? This is DynamoDB specific. And so when you see something like put item, you may think what is this? I'm familiar with MongoDB or some other NoSQL database. DynamoDB is a completely different beast. It was created by AWS. It has its own specific language and its own terminology. However, it's a NoSQL database at the center. It's just getting the stuff in and out is a little bit different. So right underneath that, we have the key. So you can see here we have ID, and it's a S, which stands for string. And then we have context.arguments.id. So with this line of code here, which looks a little bit weird if you haven't seen something like this before, all we really need to pay attention to is that we're telling it to put something into the database with a specific ID, and then we're giving it attribute values of author, and then that's a string, and then we get the arguments.author. So what's basically happening is that we're putting something into a database, and we're adding an author field, and that author field is going to have something like a name or something, right? So you can imagine that this request would say ID 1, author Ryan Jones. And so that's what that request would be. It can be much more complex. For instance, underneath attribute values, this could be 100 different fields that we're inputting or that we're putting into the database. But at the core, this is all that's required. There's no Lambda function, no JavaScript or anything like that that's talking to DynamoDB or creating a request to DynamoDB. It's just this file. So I'm really excited about it because what you can do with this is you could actually have a for loop above this attribute values, and then you could loop over all the context.arguments, so the things that are passed to AppSync. You could loop over all these fields, and then you could generate this, I can't like highlight it, but you can generate this object automatically. So then even if you had hundreds of fields, you could create this attribute values object just through a for loop. And now you can input all of your data into the database with just with like a static file. And so that really scales really nicely. So for the R and CRUD for reading and getting things out of the database, we have a very basic example. So as before, operation is get item. So it's not put item this time. That was for putting stuff into the database. This is getting stuff from the database. The only field that's required here is ID. So if you know the ID of the record that you're getting out of the database, this is all you need. This is like 7 lines of code versus something that could be hundreds of lines of code. Give me 1 second. Notifications. Okay, very good. Okay, so on that line where it says ID, you can see again context.arguments. So when you see this context.arguments, what is that referring to? So whenever AppSync is actually going to use these velocity templating language files, there's always context. And context is like the object that gets passed into the VTL file. And so then the VTL file has access to pull stuff out of context. And so when we make that request, when we were doing that get post query earlier, if we go back a few slides, you can see here on line 20, it says get post and then get post again, and then parentheses ID. So ID would be an argument. So if I pose a question to you, inside of that VTL file, when it gets that post from the database, how would you access the ID that's being passed inside this query? And you would run context.arguments.id, and that's all that's required. So now you know how the data actually flows into the VTL file, and you can see that here, context.arguments.id. And the same thing, context.arguments.author, that would just be another argument inside of that function there. Yeah. And moving to the next one. So this is get by ID, a few lines of code. The next one is get all. So this one's even easier. So to get all the stuff from your database, you just need operation scan, right? So when you first load up Twitter and you get hit with all these new updates and all these Twitter posts and all these things, that's a get all request. And you can do that by just running this like 4 lines of code. And you're not even running it necessarily. Like you just have a static file called get all.vtl, and you put this inside of it, and you tell AppSync to connect to that file. That's it. There's no other, nothing else. There's no like crazy. And so this would be a get all advanced example. So for instance, let's say we're going to get all the data from the database, but we want to add a count, right? So the count would be like a limit. So imagine it's Twitter and there's millions of tweets, right? Yeah. Or something just happened and there's some tragedy and thousands of people are tweeting about it, or hundreds of thousands. You don't want to do a get all request against 100,000 things from your database. And so in that case, you can add a count, which says like, only give me back 100 things, or only give me back 1,000 things. And so basically what this does is this VTL file will check to see if there's a count or not. And if there is, it'll add a limit using the context.arguments.count. Otherwise, it'll leave it out. And then underneath that, it'll say if context.arguments.nextToken. So when you actually do, let's say you scan 1,000, or you want 1,000 things back, there's actually 100,000 in the database. What'll happen with DynamoDB is it gives you a token, which is called nextToken. When you pass that to the next request, it then gives you back the next 1,000, and then you pass the next token again, and you get back another 1,000, and you keep doing that process until you get back all the data that you need. So imagine, for instance, you had a website, and that website was showing, like let's say it's showing jobs, right? And so on this job website, it has pages of jobs, right? So page 1 will only have 50 things. So then the request will be get all jobs with a limit of 50, and then the next token would be the next 50. And so each time the user clicks the button for 2, 3, 4, it's making a request for the next amount. And so this is a really simple, like, that's complex functionality. And this is just like, like 15 lines of hard-coded stuff that could be reused for every single database that you have. It's not specific to any database. Obviously, it's DynamoDB, but it's not specific to the data. This is a hard-coded thing that you could do for all get all requests. Past that, we have the U. So this would be the update functionality. So as you can see here, we have an operation of update item, same as the other two. And then we have the ID, same as the other two. So context.arguments.id. And then we're saying update expression. So we're saying add tags, and then this colon tags. So this colon tags part, it may look a little bit complex, but actually automatically DynamoDB, if it sees that, it's going to look at the expression values. And the expression values has colon tags, and then it has this object. And the object here tells it what tags actually is, right? So it's kind of interesting. The DynamoDB syntax, you can actually make this a lot easier to look at. I didn't actually do it for this part. If I did, you would actually see something like, context.dynamodb.stringify or something. DynamoDB and AWS, remember I said that they created that package. Well, that package actually allows you to not have to manually write out like curly brace SS colon array value. You could basically just throw anything inside of it, and it's going to automatically detect the data type. It'll detect if it's an array, it'll detect if it's a number, or if it's a string, and it'll automatically give it the correct data type for DynamoDB. So that's even more functionality that you can do with these VTL files. So the D in CRUD, this would be delete. So the delete, just like get item and put item, very, very simple. It's the same amount of lines of code as the get item by ID. You literally just give it the ID, and you tell it the operation is delete item, and that's it. And now you've deleted something from your database. And so you can imagine that you have, let's imagine that we kept the same standard across 15 different DynamoDB tables, right? So this is a gigantic company. Maybe this one team has 15 tables. And so what happens on every single one of those tables, if they were all called ID, then you could reuse that one file for all 15 databases to handle delete. So you wouldn't have to recreate delete functionality for every single table. You just have that one file. And that's the same thing with get item by ID. So if they all use the same type of key value, then you can reuse that file across every single one of those. And so for the most part, if you had a different key value, the only thing that you have to change here is this one line, right? So let's say your ID was actually, we've been using tweets and Twitter. And so let's say this is tweet underscore ID. Then the key would change to tweet underscore ID. And then you would say context.arguments tweet underscore ID. And that would be the only difference between your DynamoDB tables. So what does the API response look like? So all of these ones are API request. So after the request comes to AppSync, and then AppSync checks the schema to make sure that it works, and then passes it to the VTL file, which will then pass it to DynamoDB. When DynamoDB responds back, how does that VTL file respond back to AppSync, right? There has to be two VTL files, one for the request and one for the response. And so this is all you need to actually handle a response, one line of code. So this one line VTL file, so this would be like response.vtl, this can then hook up to your AppSync for that resolver. And now what you're doing is you're saying $utils.toJSON and then context.result. So after it goes to DynamoDB, it'll then send back context again, but the context is going to have a property called .result. And so all you're doing is saying, whatever comes back from DynamoDB, put it inside of this, this function called toJSON, and that's what actually gives you back that JSON response to the front end. And so full end-to-end functionality there. So if it was a GET request, you have that like 5 or that 10 lines of code VTL file for get item by ID, and then you have this one line of code for the response. And that's just replaced your entire Lambda function. Yeah. There's nothing to debug. I talked to the AppSync team this morning, and there's no cost either. So if you replace your Lambda function with VTL files, you're not paying for it. You're only paying for DynamoDB. Whereas before, you're paying for DynamoDB and the Lambda function. Now you're only paying for DynamoDB. Wow. So your cost is cut quite dramatically. So if you're interested in learning more, we've got a few helpful different things that we're working on at Serverless Guru, and we would love to show you. So the first one, we've got a YouTube channel, which we're streaming on live right now. Hey to all the YouTube people. And then here's our Serverless Guru YouTube channel. We've got a lot of different stuff. If you want to get specific about AppSync, Luke on our team at Serverless Guru, he is a full stack cloud developer, and he's been creating a series on AppSync specifically. So we've talked about a high level concepts about all the different terminology, verbiage, all these things, the difference between a REST API and GraphQL. But if you want to actually build something, a real project, check out our YouTube channel. We've got the videos up there. Also, yesterday, we launched a new free course on our training site. So our training site is training.serverlessguru.com. And you can see here on the left, we have AWS AppSync. So if you want to watch those 3 videos and be updated when new videos come out, definitely sign up for our training site versus YouTube. And if you're interested in becoming a beta user for our kind of like flagship course, we've got Serverless 0 to Paid Professional. Right now we have 88 lessons up. The price tag on that when we release it, it's going to be around $200 once we roll out like another 100 courses or 100 lessons. So it'll be about like 100 more videos that we're going to roll out for this, which is going to be like full end-to-end, like learn everything about serverless that you need to be a developer at a company. Right now we've got 88 and we'll be rolling out new ones every day. And with that though, before we actually finish the full course, we're actually getting beta access. So if you want to get in contact with us, send us your email, ask for beta access. You can hit us up on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram. Take a selfie with a notepad that says, give me beta access, and we'll give you beta access. That'll give you a chance to enroll into the course for free. You can take it, go through all the videos that we currently have, give us feedback, and then we'll edit the course as needed to better, fit your needs and other people's. So definitely check out for that. Medium publication. So we write really actively on our Medium. And actually, I'll give Josh Proto a chance to, what is our Medium publication?
Yeah, so our Medium publication is at Serverless Guru, and we have many, many different kinds of technologically focused tutorials and how-to articles and case study articles where we talk about things like AppSync or even just different AWS services or working with serverless framework. So if you're interested in seeing just like not just going super deep on AWS AppSync, but are interested in a wider variety of serverless technologies and frameworks and services, I would check out our Medium because a lot of people love it. A lot of people give us compliments on it. And it's really good information, and that's all free right there.
Yeah, well said. And as you see up here in the top left corner, Luke wrote an article about building a live updating app with AWS AppSync subscriptions. So that means that we already have an article out which talks about real-time communication. But as Josh said, we write about serverless stuff all the time. We're rolling out like 2 articles per week or more. So stay tuned on that, and you'll probably end up finding something around the topic that you're interested in. If we don't have something, reach out to us, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pigeon, whatever ends up working, and we'll definitely write about it. The next thing we have coming up in the near future is the podcast. So we have a podcast called Talking Serverless at talkingserverless.io. And we've already recorded the first podcast episode, and that'll be released shortly. And then we have a few more episodes coming up with like the CEO of Thundra. We'll be talking to Protego and all these different companies and serverless heroes in the space, like at some point, hopefully on Kui as well.
Yeah,
so,
we're talking right now.
Yeah, exactly. And, Nader Davitt, if you're watching this, we would love to have you on the podcast too. And that's it. So thank you so much for watching. This is a kind of an image of the team here working at for Serverless Guru at the WeWork down in downtown Portland. And the next one would be Q&A. So if there's any questions or anything like that, definitely give us a shout, and I'll pass it over to Josh Brody.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ryan. I know we're running a tight ship today. We have another webinar that we're doing another training right after this. So what is it on again? It's
we will be doing how to build infrastructure as code for serverless.
Yep,
yeah,
exactly. So again, I just want to echo, if you have any questions or any things you want to see done in the serverless space, reach out to us. And we love making things for the community and writing about it. So yeah, this is a good chance we would probably do it. So thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you on the other side.
All right, see ya. Thanks.
Good.